top 5 toxins in your food that are hurting your hormones and maybe your nervous system too. We're going to dive into that topic here today. Rob, how we doing, man? What's cooking?
Hey, good, man. Just having a good day today and relaxing. Doing some a study out there and saw this new study that came out from Economic Working Group that we're going to chat about today. And yeah,
Excellent.
how you doing, man?
Doing good, doing good. Excited to dive back in. Had a busy day of patients already, and we're ending the day with a nice little podcast interview. So, been a pretty brain stimulating day. So excited.
Awesome.
All right. So we talked about out of the gate. We talked about this compound. It's considered like a growth retardant. It's wouldn't really call it a pesticide, but the drug name is chlormequat, and it works on inhibiting this gibberellin pathway. I want to say gibberish, but gibberellin pathway. It's like short for germination, and basically, it's that pathway is involved in elongating like a corn stalk or an oat stalk or a wheat stalk, and it inhibits that. So then it shortens the stalk up and it thickens the wall to make harvesting a lot easier and more manageable. And so that is a toxin that they're finding in lots of grains. An EWG study found urine samples from the last 5 years of it being in a significant amount of grain products. Cheerios is a common one. And you can imagine if you're getting exposed to a medication, we'll call it a medication slash pesticide in plants that's inhibiting growth. You can imagine it's probably not helping your growth, your cells' health or growth and development, and your kids' health and growth and development. Because most of these cereals are going to be targeted to kids. So just another fun-filled toxin that we have to work on at being educated about and helping our kids avoid.
Yeah, and they also pointed out in 2023 is when they looked at a couple of different oat-based products. One of them was Cheerios, and the other one was Quaker Oats. But 92% of them had this inside of it, and so that's sort of a little bit concerning, especially because they have animal studies that link chlormequat to reduce fertility, doing harm to the reproductive system and altered fetal growth. So you're finding what they're doing inside of the plants or inside of the stalks and modifying those so that they behave in a certain way. And the studies are starting to support that even from an animal perspective. And then, of course, we can probably make some correlations of what that's going to do to us. So this is relatively new. So there's not a ton of literature out there on this, like something like glyphosate or some other kind of pesticide that we know more about. So we're sort of like pinch hitting here and untying this thing, live with you guys.
Yeah. Also, too, looking at some of the studies, it seems like that chlormequat works on inhibiting the cytochrome P450 oxidase pathways in plants. Now, let's kind of break this down. We all aren't biochemists here, but that cytochrome P450 oxidase pathway is one of the major enzymatic pathways that works on detoxification in your body. And so it doesn't take a couple of steps to figure out, well, if it's inhibiting that in plants and I'm eating those plants, whether it's grains, cereals, et cetera, and that medication or drug is getting in me, how is that impacting my detoxification pathway? I mean, logic would say that it's probably having a negative impact on your detoxification pathway. You inhibit that cytochrome P450 oxidase pathway. These are the pathways we try to upregulate with B vitamins, methylation, glutathione, glycine, milk thistle, antioxidants. So a lot of these nutrients are involved in upregulating these pathways. But if we're inhibiting with the drug, it's going to make it really hard to remove many different toxins outside of just chlormequat. We can glyphosate, all your other pesticides and heavy metals, etc.
Yeah, and just even talking about like normal digestion, what is digestion for, right? And so one, it's nutrient absorption, but two is like toxin elimination, and so we try to do our best to give our body the building blocks that it needs to do what it needs to do to build the cells, to build the hormones. The amino acids can do their jobs, and then our metabolic processes can take place all the way down to the cell, and finally we can discharge that detox. So anything that's going to stress the system out, like this or like glyphosate or like any other kind of toxin, is something worth talking about. And it's in oats and the same kind of culprit that we've seen over the years. We and these other kind of products have been modified over the years, and we've known about it.
Yeah, and they're heavily marketed to kids, right? They're convenient, right? What kid doesn't want to just go do cereal? And it's easy for a parent to be like, all right, yeah, cereal, it's not involving cooking or the toaster oven. You won't burn down the house. Sure, like go get some cereal, right? But in general, I mean, people talk about getting their kids going gluten-free and grain-free and they feel better. But, is it really just the gluten? I think the gluten's a big deal. did a big podcast with Tom O'Brien, and we talked about gluten being one of the big things that activates the toll-like receptors and
Mm-hmm.
increases the protein
Yeah.
zonulin and opens up the gut permeability. But also, what if part of the reason why we have improvements with gluten is we're getting less of these toxic laden chemicals that are in most of the grains? Because that EWG study said it's in a lot of the grains.
Yeah. Well, and absolutely. I mean, I listened to that conversation that you had with Dr. Tom O'Brien as
Mhm.
well. And just, the conversation about, how do you know that you have a gut issue? How do you know that you're reacting to gluten? How do you know
Bingo.
this is happening? And a lot of times what we do is we focus on say, well, do I have a gut issue? But the conversation, leads it's a little bit different. What's the downstream effect? You might not have gut issues. You might have issues. You might have issues other areas downstream in your body. So that's something to consider. The brain, the gut, they're tied together, so you can't separate the two.
100%. Yeah. And so we talked about that in that interview, that you were 8 times more likely with gluten sensitivity issues to have a brain issue, a mood issue, an energy issue, meaning it's not just digestive. So when people hear like foods impacting, your gut, they're like, oh, well, if I don't have bloating or gas or this flatulence or burping, I'm probably fine. Probably not. And so that's why
Mhm.
one of the first things I work with patients on, even with patients sometimes without digestive issues, is we'll work on getting their body systems upregulated to break down and absorb their nutrients better. Because so many people we see, they're just stressed. Their sympathetic nervous systems in overdrive, whether it's from chlormequat or other toxins, that they don't have the ability to break down their food optimally.
Yeah, and if you look at both the gut and then you look at the parasympathetic, sympathetic, which is your brain or the nervous system, I mean that's where you have opportunities for herbs. You can use ashwagandha, you can use maca, you can use a bunch of different types of herbs that can help you to sort of regulate and get back into a parasympathetic mode, which is then going to help out the gut as well. But let's talk a little bit about like food cross reactivity,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of people think about gluten.
Yeah.
Can you sort of explain to people what cross reactivity is?
Well, I mean, just think about it as like you, right? And then think about, how you, maybe your brother and your sister look, maybe have a little bit of family resemblance, and then think about how aunts and uncles and cousins as the family tree goes further out, there's still a little bit of a resemblance. And when you look at gluten, right, we consider that to be the gliadin protein, primarily wheat. We'll put wheat under that umbrella. Some will put barley and rye as well. So let's say wheat, barley, and rye are under the expanded gluten umbrella. But then we have things like rice that are going to have a protein called horsinin in it. The
Mhm.
major protein that we consider gluten is gliadin. Then we have things like oat, which is avenin, or corn, which is zein. These are other types of proteins or prolamines under the bigger umbrella of glutens. We'll call gluten is the big umbrella, and then the one that we associate with gluten is really the gliadin protein. And our immune system sees them. Our toll-like receptors, which are the centurion guard that sits there in the gut and part of our immune system that is going to call in inflammatory cascades, will increase zonulin, create gut permeability if we have a stressor there. And so you can have that immune cross reactivity. Rice is one that's going to cause that, maybe a little bit less if it's white rice. Corn and oats more, and then you add in some pesticide stress. Now you have a protein, and then you have an agitated immune system because you're having toxins in there too, which could probably enhance the gut permeability, thus stimulate a stronger immune reaction as well downstream.
Yeah, and just clinically, like even seeing inside of our clinic, it's the top six that we look at is dairy products, corn, millet, oats, rice, yeast, and it's different for everybody. I mean, it's a bio individual thing, right? Some people might react. Some people's immune system might look at rice and react. Some people might look at millet and react, and some people's might not. So it really depends on the person and what their immune system is doing and what all the other cofactors are that are involved in that. And that's why like working with somebody that knows how to break these things apart, help you to understand how your body's processing, what the biochemistry is doing, is super important. Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to eat things and eat things that you enjoy. But generally speaking, taking gluten out is sort of, I don't know that I've ever heard a person that's in this field ever promote gluten. What are your
You
thoughts
would
on
be
that?
surprised. I think there are some people that are what's the word? when you try to be the opposite. You just try to be
Oh,
controversial, right? People just try,
polar
oh, it's
opposite.
not gluten,
Yeah.
right? They try to polarizing, and they'll just
Yeah.
try to do the opposite and say the opposite just to get clicks. But in general, like when you look at foods like gluten, right, they don't have any super nutrient or super antioxidant or super compound you can't get from
Mm.
green vegetables. Yeah, they're a starch. You could use another safe starch like white potato or sweet potato or plantains that are still going to have a good starch glucose load if you need it for working out or just exercise, or because you have issue with weight gain, right? You're trying to gain weight, then you can do a
Mhm.
healthy, safe starch. So I think that's good. Excellent. Now, we talked about chlormequat, just
Yep.
chlormequat, right?
Overclock.
Funny name. I could say that 10 times fast.
Yeah.
Chlormequat. Now, we
Kinda
can
hard
kind
to
of
do.
go into glyphosate or Roundup. That's another excellent one to look at because
Mhm.
many grains and soybeans are going to be genetically modified, so they're going to have that residue as well. Now, this is interesting. I'm going to pull up my screen here so you guys can see what I'm looking at here. This is
A little
pretty
bit
cool.
of a
All
little
right,
bit of a
cool.
biochem lesson here.
Yeah, so this is cool. So looking at here the shikimic acid pathway
Mhm.
and glyphosate, which is the major pesticide, which is basically Roundup, right? This is a chelator type of pesticide. It essentially binds and chelates and pulls away a lot of the minerals from the plant, which then allows it to kill things around it. And so it'll essentially they'll program bacteria in the plant to be resistant to an antibiotic. And so then what they do is they create resistance in the plants, and that allows them to come in and drop Roundup through a plane. And so the difference with
Mhm.
pesticides is before you could kill the plant with the pesticide. And so you had to be careful where you sprayed it. They'd use a wand. They'd be very careful where it's sprayed. And of course, you wouldn't want to use too much because you wouldn't want to kill the plants around it that are healthy, right? So now you go in, you genetically program the plant to be resistant to this pesticide, right? Glyphosate. And then you can blanket glyphosate everywhere. And so then you're using exponential more levels of pesticides than you would if you had to actually be careful. And so then now it's killing everything around it by chelating, by pulling the minerals. Well, the problem with that is minerals in the soil help the plants grow healthy and have a good nutrient proliferation or a nutrient expression. So, for instance, if you grow like a plant with manganese deficient soil, you will have less vitamin C in that plant, for instance. And so, if you start to chelate out and pull out a lot of these important minerals, it's going to express less nutrient density in the plant. So, that's one thing. But then, toxicity wise, right, glyphosate impacts the shikimic pathway. And if
Mhm.
you go and look at shikimic, this is the amino acid pathway. It works on the aromatic decarboxylase enzyme, and this
Mhm.
is the enzyme that synthesizes phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. Why is that important? Phenylalanine and tyrosine go down the dopamine pathway, so very important for focus, feeling good, cognitive function. And tryptophan goes down the serotonin pathway, and serotonin
Mhm.
goes down the pathway of melatonin, helps with sleep and mood. And so, big picture, right? Kind of zoomed in, zoom back out. This type of compound that's going to lower the nutrients in the soil. It's going to block the shikimic pathway, which blocks the aromatic decarboxylase enzyme, which is going to lower your ability to make serotonin in your body potentially,
Mhm.
make dopamine, make neurotransmitters, make catecholamine. So you're not going to have optimal neurotransmitter expression getting exposed to some of this potential Roundup and glyphosate.
Yeah, and would you say that that sort of correlates then with maybe even the depression and other kind of mental issues that we're seeing inside of not just children but adults as well?
Well, I think so because the more you create inflammation, whether it's from inhibiting pathways or putting a toxic load on your body, it's going to create inflammation in the brain. Inflammation in the brain is going to activate microglial cells, immune
Mhm.
cells, and when those are activated, you're not going to think clear. You're going to be feeling foggy, right? Because inflammation in the brain will express with brain fog, as mood issues, as energy issues, as sleep issues, and so anytime we have inflammation in the body, inflammation in the gut, it can easily make its way to the brain, cross our astrocytes, which are going to be our
Mhm.
blood-brain barrier, BBB, blood-brain barrier, and that can then activate our microglial cells on the other side of the blood-brain barrier, which are our immune cells.
Yeah, and this kind of backs up too to again gut function. Leaky gut and a predisposed gut for bacteria, at least yeast or any other kinds of overgrowth. So it's not even just necessarily glyphosate itself; it also predisposes its body or your body for other substances to get into the bloodstream, right?
Yeah, and then glyphosate, interesting enough, it's a glycine molecule. They use a glycine molecule and they, genetically modify it and make it a
Uh,
chelator in a way. And the key is it's making the plant resistant to it, which allows you to just blast pesticides everywhere. And so that screws up the soil more, lowers nutrient density. And this
yeah.
is why I had Joe Salatin on my podcast a few years back, and he was saying that he took his eggs to a lab and compared it to conventional eggs, and he found 20 times more folate in his egg than the conventional egg. Well, how does that happen? Well, when you're blitzing glyphosate all over the soil, right? And that's going to impact the grass, and then that's going to who eats the grass afterwards? Cows and chickens, right? And so
Yeah.
that's going to impact the nutrients in the eggs very, very easily.
Yeah, it's the web, right? It's sort of the food
Mhm.
web. And so it's going to have a downstream, upstream effect, right? It goes both
Bingo.
ways. But it's sort of like we always look at the food and we say, okay, well, we just assume that our food is good, right? Or there was an assumption. I think a lot of people
Bingo.
are educated now with that, but we just assume that it's good, it's filled with nutrients, it's filled with the things that it's supposed to, and then I eat that and I'm going to be fine. But it's really there's a correlation. We're starting to see this more and more. Literature is out there. Clinically, we're seeing it more and more that the food that you eat, that you put inside of your mouth, or the water that you drink these are the basics, the basic building blocks. And I think there's also, it's really easy to not understand it from a logical sense. And so I think there's a lot of value for people to take something like an intro biochem course, or at least just look at a few different videos to understand the basics of this stuff. And it starts to make sense, I think. And when something makes sense, you tend to have more cooperation with it, right? Instead of just saying, oh no, our food is fine. My kids can just eat whatever it is that they're going to eat. And, there's not going to be any issues. But yet we're seeing like an increase in diseases and chronic issues at younger and younger ages. Alzheimer's is skyrocketing, cancer is skyrocketing. I mean, everything seems to be skyrocketing. And I think most people are starting to come to a point where they're saying, okay, like something's going on.
Oh,
And this
by
is
the
what
way,
we're talking about.
dude, by the way, just to you talked about Alzheimer's. I wanted to piggyback on my podcast this Monday with Dr. O'Brien. He talked about a Blue Cross Blue Shield study that was released right at the top of 2020, right at the start of the year. I mean, it didn't really make it big because there was a little known virus that was hanging out back then, during 2020, right? We can
I
all
remember.
think about what that was without saying it. But
Yeah.
in that study, they looked at an age group of 35 to 45-year-old people with a 300 to 400% increased diagnosis of Alzheimer's. So we had an age group of 35 to 45-year-old men and women with Alzheimer's, 400% risk, right? Because our brains are aging and inflamed at such an accelerated level due to toxins, due to insulin resistance, due to inflammation or
Yeah.
inflammaging. And so the
Yeah.
fact that Blue Cross is putting that up, a 400% increase in the 35 to 45 age group is insane. Like, people need to be talking about this.
Well, I think what you're pointing, what we're talking about is sort of the mainstream is finally starting to lift up the curtain a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been, grassroots people talking about this stuff, and now you can actually see a lot of the studies out there that are being put out by, by companies like Blue Cross. You're seeing the CDC put out stuff. You're seeing HWO put out things. You're seeing a lot of people finally saying, okay, yeah, there's a problem going on. And the reality is you make a good point. He said, you're not getting Alzheimer's in your 50s or 60s. You get it all the way back in your 20s and 30s. So these are things like the brain fog, dizziness, dizzy spells. Like if you're just not quite feeling right, depression, all of these things are signs, right? Not just of Alzheimer's itself, but anything in your body can be reacting. Not just that. So from a functional perspective, we're looking at increasing the function of your body, detoxing some of that stuff out so that your brain can actually have space so they can heal again. But anyhow, I'll let you take this away. It looks like you got to study up. Are these pathways? Oh, here's the Alzheimer's. Okay. Is that the...
Oh, can you hear me here? Yeah, we
Yeah.
bring the receipts in this podcast. This is the Blue Cross Blue Shield study that I mentioned right at the top of 2020, right? We bring the receipts. The numbers diagnosed with these conditions increased 373% among 30 to 44-year-olds, 311% increase among 45 to 54, and then 143 among 55 to 64. So what's really crazy for me is this 30 to 44, because no
Yeah.
one thinks about someone that young developing
No.
Alzheimer's. It starts then.
Yeah.
Alzheimer's starts in your 30s. And these are people that are diagnosed, not even like, so this person right here at 30 is
Yeah.
starting probably at age 10, right? That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. It's pretty wild to see this
We're
stuff.
bringing it back to, like, I know we talked about the top 5 toxins, but guess what? It's impacting your brain. And if you
Yeah.
think we're talking Alzheimer's, oh, that's my grandfather's problem, right? No, it's our problem too. And it's your kid's problem too. I have a 4 and 6-year-old boy, right? It's their problem too. We're starting now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's all of our problems. I mean, that's why you got to know what your body's doing. What are your hormones look like? What's your immune system doing? What's your detox systems doing? What are your digestive, energy, like what are these things doing? And I think this really shines a big light on functional medicine in terms of, hey, we need to know how your body is functioning so that we can help to support it to get these things out and to get the right nutrients in, because this is just what the 21st century is giving us. Right. This is what we have. We go back 100 years. This isn't the battle that we're fighting, but it's the battle that we're fighting now.
Yep. No, I agree. I agree. So we hit chlormequat, my favorite word, and we have the glyphosate,
New favorite word.
Roundup,
Yeah.
right? Roundup,
Yep.
and we have just the increased use of it and how it impacts soil and nutrients and how it impacts the aromatic decarboxylase enzyme. And then let's go into the next thing we want to talk about: heavy metals, right? Heavy metals are a big deal. We're going to see it potentially in fish. We're going to see it in our mercury fillings. We're going to see it in certain kinds of rice. We'll see it
Mhm.
potentially in lead pipes and things like that. You could think of the Flint, Michigan issue years back. Right? These are all going to be major sources of heavy metals. And so, of course, first thing we can do is get our water clean, right? Clean
Yep.
water is going to make a big difference. Avoiding a lot of the processed grains will also help. Being more organic, because a lot of times pesticides could have a heavy metal residue in some of the pesticides. And so being more organic will help significantly reduce a lot of that load. And then with fish, I don't worry about fish too much because I think the amount of good fatty acids that are in fish are worth it. It's more of
Mhm.
the selenium to mercury ratio, because selenium naturally increases glutathione and chelates mercury. So if we get fish that are like a skipjack tuna or good quality like flash frozen wild Alaskan sockeye or salmon, we're going to be
Yeah.
in a good place because that selenium to mercury ratio is good. It'll be the shark, the pilot whale, the swordfish, but we got to make sure that selenium to mercury ratio is good, and we'll put a link for that as well in the show notes.
Yeah, and then two
Comments, bro.
things. Yeah, two things with that with the water. Just adding back, right? So if you have a
Right.
Berkey system, like we have a Berkey, and a Berkey does a great job, but it does a great job on both ends, right? You're going to lose what's good, and you're going to lose what's bad. So adding back either some sea salt and or doing electrolytes during the day, you got to make sure that you're getting those minerals that your body needs that typically come from water. But if you've got a Berkey or you got something that cleans this stuff out real well, you want to be adding that back, or else you create an issue long term somewhere else
Yeah.
down the road. And then number two, from the fish, I don't remember if you said this or not, but from a farm raised perspective, avoid the farm raised and cold. What do you typically
Yes.
look for? Cold water, wild.
Yeah, I mean, wild Alaskan a wild like flash frozen are going to be ideal just because of freshness. It's
Yep.
going to be tough to get fish fresh unless you're on a coast, and they can be expensive. And so, get some of the flash frozen ones are going to be pretty good. Sockeye's good, salmon's good.
Yeah.
Those are going to be great, ways to do it. Skipjack tuna really high in
Mhm.
in selenium to mercury ratio. So those are some good, easy sources out of the gate. Good can of tuna fish, and then they got some BPA free cans at Whole Foods, so you can avoid some of that. And it's still good protein, it's still good fat. Like, you got to say what's cost effective. I can get 30 grams of protein in a can of tuna fish for like under $2. I can
Yep.
add some olive oil or avocado oil in there, some mayo. I can get some shredded kale in there, and I got a good protein rich, a lot of nutrient dense meal. 30 grams of protein, good fat, under $3. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to think, like, what are some simple ways that the everyday person, because
Can do
I
that.
created these meals because I was a poor college student for the longest time, right? In college for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, how can I eat
I
healthy and do
remember
this
that.
thing and practice what I preach while living on in California, I think $15,000 a year in financial aid. I think I was looking back then, it was like, you're poor in California, you could be on welfare, family of 4 for $140,000 now. And I'm like, wow, it was just me, $15,000. So I'm like, how can I do this health thing and not be a hypocrite, right? Chicken thighs with skin on, but skipjack tuna,
Yeah.
avocado oil, avocado based mayo, get a little, get a little avocado in there as well, right? And maybe a little bit
Yeah.
little pickles or some shredded organic kale is a great way to do it. So I like that.
Yeah. Well, and just kind of like piggyback off the conversation, so we already talked about pesticides, but then, you're mentioning heavy metals now. So I think for people out there to just remember that's sort of the additive, right? It's like, okay, we got pesticides, but now we got heavy metals. So we're adding
Bingo.
stressors, right?
Yeah.
We're adding stressors.
Yeah.
It's not less, it's not more. Look, and here's the deal. We're not trying to create hypochondriacs. All we're doing is saying, hey, here's the reality of what we're seeing, both clinically and in literature, and for you
Right.
guys to know about it, right? And
Yep.
how do we deal with that in the 21st century? What do we need to do that's different now that maybe our grandparents didn't need to do, right? Because things have changed dramatically. I think people are starting to realize that, and that's what this talk is really all about. So we got heavy metals, we got
And by the way,
pesticides.
pesticides really didn't come about till after World War II, right? The
Yeah, yeah,
pesticide industry basically came up because we were basically building bombs for World War II, and we had all these factories and things, and a lot of the chemicals we use, right? A lot of the MPK formulas that we use for fertilizers and chemicals, we were using to build bombs, right? And so this is kind of the post World War II era where chemicals came into play. Pre World War II, everything was really organic, for the most part.
yeah. So just right off the bat here, I'm looking at PBS. It says that there's more than 80,000 chemicals registered for use today in the United States.
Yeah, and then they get a
80,000.
GRAS status, which means they have very little study to hit a GRAS status, which is generally recognized as safe. GRAS.
Yeah, what was that thing that Dr. Tom O'Brien said when he on the conversation about how approval happens in the United States? I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I forget. I mean, basically, it's innocent until proven guilty in that sense.
Is
Where
the 24
other
hour?
countries. What's that? Say it again.
You remember the 24 hour? How he was saying like the way that we base it is based off of a 24-hour study. Like if it looks bad for you in 24 hours, then
Yes,
we. But if it doesn't, then it's fine. And I think he said 12, if I remember right. The
I
U.S.
have to
has
go.
like,
I have to go listen to that
yeah, we'd
again.
have to look at it
Basically,
again.
it ignored the idea or the concept that these chemicals can bioaccumulate over time. It's like, well,
Yeah,
if it creates an acute issue, like maybe a high amount of mercury or some kind of nasty chemical would,
yeah,
then okay, we'll keep an eye on it. But if not, we just kind of ignore the bioaccumulation concept, and
yeah.
that's
And the
why
problem
it's.
is, yeah, go ahead, man.
Go ahead. No, good.
What the problem is, when do you cross that line, right? When do we look back at the data again? At what point do you say, okay, it's been 3 years, now look good, or now it's been 10 years, or now it's been 15 years? But then it's like we can blame it on something else, right?
Yeah.
It's much harder to see it then, but other countries are doing a lot better job at eliminating these things or banning these things. So that's just something to be aware of, that we're actually not doing a great job, at least in my opinion, of really taking a good look at these things.
Well, I mean, you need long-term studies, right? You need to look at how our bodies detoxify. How does it, if it impacts our hormones in any way or nervous system in any way, we got to be very careful of it. How do we detoxify it? Can we run a test to see how it's coming out of our kidneys, out of our stool,
Yeah.
and how is it impacting our body, right? And these studies need to be long-term. They need to factor in that you're probably getting these toxins with other toxins, and what does that interplay look like, right?
Yeah.
And it's tough. I mean, that's why, as a clinician, I mean, do you want to be a guinea pig? Just be organic, be as clean as possible. Eat the way we've evolved to eat, right? And I think you're better off doing that. Now, so next up is going to be mycotoxins. This is a big deal. Now, we'll see a lot of these things on corn, on grains as well. And I could tell you that a lot of farmers that farm corn and grains have to use a lot of fungicides to
Hmm.
work on the mold, because mold can destroy crops.
Absolutely.
So when you have grains and crops that are very mold prone, you get a lot of fungicide exposure as well. All right.
Mhm.
Now, mold in and of itself, whether it's aflatoxins or ochratoxin, right? Aspergillus, penicillium molds, these are going to
Mhm.
be major stressors on your hormones. You're going to see here, it can significantly increase T4 to T3, or should decrease T4 to T3 conversion. So it can lower your active thyroid hormone for sure. And that's going to lower metabolism. It's going to lower energy.
Mhm.
Let me pull up one study here. So here we go. We'll go share this tab instead. We'll bring
Mhm.
you guys the receipts. All right. So pesticides with for thyroid disrupting effects. I mean, you can see all the different pesticides here that can impact thyroid homeostasis. They can impact thyroid hormone production. They impact a lot of the proteins in the liver. And again, the 5-deiodinase enzyme that helps activate T4 to T3. Guess where it's made?
Mhm.
In the liver. And so you can see here, we conclude the pesticides were placed on the market with insufficient testing other than acute or chronic toxicity. And second, that thyroid-specific endpoints for neurodevelopmental effects and mixture assessments are largely absent from regulatory directives. So they're just not really looking at thyroid function when it comes to a lot of these chemicals. They're not running these tests to even see if it's being negatively impacted. So interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and we got now again we're adding on top of everything, right? Like first we started with pesticides, now we got heavy metals, now we got mycotoxins, right? Just adding on top of that, and the mycotoxins, impacts the liver damage, like you're talking about, suppressing the immune system, and really a potent carcinogen. So there's all kinds of associations with metabolic issues, including liver cancer. So there's a lot with mycotoxins.
Now,
Go
when you
ahead.
talk about mycotoxins, how about in your home? How about in your home because you have a water leak, you never addressed it correctly, or you have chronically high humidity, or you don't have a good air filtration, and the dust that you have in your home is interacting with the moderately high humidity of greater than 50%, and then you're building mold that way. And that could be an easy toxin exposure that's not even from food and processed grains, if you will.
Yeah, mold has a lot of different ways that it can get inside,
Yeah.
and it is an issue. I think at this point, at least most practitioners understand that it's a big issue. A lot of people have mold issues, whether or not they know it, is another thing. But there are many people that struggle with that. I mean, it can come out with headache. You could have migraines. You could have brain fog. You could have gut issues. I mean, wherever the weak link is inside of your body, it can disrupt. Because once it gets into the blood, I mean, it's kind of game on at that point.
100%. 110%, man. All right. So we hit the mold toxin. So of course that could be, this is why, like you don't eat grains, you keep gluten out, right? You get a lot of side benefits due to all the other toxic loads and the chlormequat,
Mhm.
right? The
Chloroquine.
mycotoxins, the pesticides, the aromatic decarboxylates, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, all these important things to keep in mind. Next, let's talk about toxins and plastics. So BPA is a big one, right? People think, oh, it's BPA free. It's like, well, guess
Yeah.
what? It's BPA-S, and that's just as bad. And you really want to stay away from plastics in general. Now, I think sometimes plastics make sense, especially when you have kids, because things break and having glass, shards everywhere isn't good. I think if you're dealing with plastics, don't keep it something in there that long, and don't expose it to UV and heat, and don't heat it up, microwave or stove, right? If it's just something quick and simple in a fridge, probably not a huge deal. In general, get Pyrex containers, get a stainless steel water bottle, get a Life Factory glass water
Mhm.
bottle with silicone on the outside. These are your good options. But in
Mhm.
the end, if you lessen your load 80%, 90%, and you use a little bit of plastic, not the end of the world, but ideally it's going to be UV heat and light going to be the big issues that are going to cause the BPA to leak out, right? When you do BPA and it's like a cold water and no UV, you're not going to really get much leakage. So just keep that in the back of your head.
Mhm. Well, and just that's the way that plastics are processed, right? They're heated up so that they melt, so they can be more
Yes.
malleable. And so the other thing that people do is, the storage after dinner, right? The dinner's not cooled off yet. Everything on the stove, you put that right into a plastic container, and that's still an issue. So,
Yes.
if after dinner, if you're doing that, just buy some glass Pyrex or something like that,
That's
which
it.
you said, Justin. Or if you can't do that, and that's not what you want to do, at least wait for it to cool off and then put it in there. It's about this consistent exposure over time, right? It's not about one time. It's about accumulation. And you hit on that earlier. It's about, I did it today. I did it for lunch. I did it for dinner. I did it tomorrow. I did it all next week, or I'm doing it all next week. Right. It's the over and over and over exposure. And then we add on top of that everything else that we talked about, right? I'm eating Cheerios, let's say, and I'm eating it out of a plastic thing. I'm getting plastic exposure. I've got heavy metal exposure. I've got mold
Yeah.
exposure. And all of a sudden it's like, you get symptoms and you're like, well, what's wrong with me? And you think it's that particular thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I got brain fog, or I got headaches every single day. And what I need to do is take Tylenol. And that's not how we view it. It's more of an upstream issue than that. We're going to be looking at the gut, what you're eating, what you're drinking, what you're putting inside of your body, and whether or not you can assimilate these things.
Exactly. And so we talk about, BPA and plastics. You go to Starbucks, right? You're like, oh, it's a paper cup, right? The hot
Yeah.
coffee paper cup. Well, that steam is going up. It's hitting the top of the lid, and that BPA is going back into your coffee, right? And this is why, like, if you're going to go out and get coffee, right? You get there, take the lid off as soon as you can. If I
Yeah.
go out, like when we go to Starbucks, something, right? I'm going to get a nice coffee, right? I don't have to worry about the heat, right? So good, better, best, right? You're not going to have much BPA leakage if something's cold.
Yeah.
And take the lid off, or you can do it at home and put it in a clean canteen, or go bring your Yeti mug or your clean canteen mug with a stainless steel top and use that instead. That's a better option.
Yeah, and especially again if it's day after day after day. If you go get Starbucks every single day, it's accumulation. That's where it becomes a problem. If you're doing it once a week, once every couple of weeks, it's probably not as big of a deal, but it's lessening your exposure to it.
Yep, 100%. So we talked about BPA, and obviously with water and plastics, we worry about microplastic runoff in the water,
Mm-hmm.
and we talked about Berkey's. My personal favorite will be some kind of a good charcoal-based whole house system and some kind of a reverse osmosis water filter. Reverse osmosis is the gold standard. I recommend everyone, even if you have a Berkey or whatever, get a TDS meter on Amazon, $15. TDS stands for total dissolved solid. You can see how many total dissolved solids. That's all minerals. It could be lead, it could be fluoride, it could be calcium, right? It's going to look at all solids in the water. And typically your tap water will be somewhere between 300 and 400 TDS, okay? When you do an RO filter, you'll get it below 25. You'll get it 98, 99% reduction. And so it's good to see, okay, this is where my water is without a filter. TDS meter, put it in, okay, 350. Okay, and now I'm down to 25 RO now. RO water comes out, 25. Okay, it's a 98, 99% reduction. That's great. So that gives you an idea if your filter's working, whether it's a Berkey or Alexa Pro Pure or an RO or a countertop filter. It gives you a good idea. Now, then you can add minerals back in, bring that maybe TDS back to 200, but you at least know that increase from 25 to 200 is good, healthy, nutritional electrolytes, not toxins in there too. And plus an RO, due to the filtration steps, will also get out a lot of the pesticides, the homeopathic drugs, and even knock down fluoride and any other hormone compounds in there from the plastics too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I guess we should hit up our trans fats now as the final component here.
Yeah, we can put trans fats or omega-6 fatty
Mhm.
acids, the junky inflammatory fats. We could put those too.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so now we've got a number of things, right? So pesticides, heavy metal, mycotoxins, BPA or plastics, and then we've got trans fat. And so let's talk a little bit about the trans fats.
Excellent. So first off, like in chemistry, right? When you go to look at if you go to look at different molecules, right? When the hydrogen molecules are in the same direction, right? This is considered a cis molecule. When it goes
Mhm.
opposite ways, this is called trans molecule. And when you look at the biochemistry of a trans molecule in your biochemistry textbook, see if mine's over there. One of the first things it says about trans molecular structure is it provides better heat stability. Now, why that matter? Okay, so why are we creating all these trans fats? Well, it's because when you have more heat stability, that means more shelf life, right? And it allows you to take these fats that would normally be liquid-based fats, because usually vegetable-based fats are going to be liquid at room temperature. Think soy oil, canola oil, safflower oil. It allows you to hydrogenate them, pump in hydrogens, create this trans structure. So now the hydrogens flip and go opposite directions. And then now it's going to be solid at room temperature. And so this is where a lot of the margarines and a lot of the processed fats came into play. So it could hold things, bakery products, processed foods together. But again, these fats are going to be very damaged in regards to their structure. And when you take in those fats, it's going to make your cell membrane, right, the outer part of your cell, that lipid bilayer, very inflexible. And it's going to make it so that inflexibility is going to decrease cellular communication, inflammation. When you have inflammation like that, it's going to impact insulin. It's going to impact endothelial function inside the blood vessels, etc. So really important things to look at. So when you look at these trans fats, it's done for shelf life purposes. It's done to make liquid fats more solid so they could put them in foods to give them more solidity as well.
Yeah, and historically speaking, we can trace this back to World War II as well. I mean, what happened is they would all of the food that was here in the U.S. they would send out to the soldiers, and
Yep.
in the U.S. they created these trans fats and other products as well. Like I think Cheez-Its started, or maybe it wasn't Cheez-Its, a couple of those. What they tried to do is to create food that would last longer. And it wasn't meant to be a forever thing, but people just never went back. They liked their Crisco. They liked these trans fats. And so they stuck with it. And that's how we have them today. But the problem is a biochem problem, right? It's not
Yes.
natural. It's not natural. It's not doing what it should be doing. It doesn't break down, right? Or it's very difficult to break down.
Longer. It takes a lot longer to break down. It takes years for
Mhm.
those cell membranes to clear out. And it's just cheaper. Like you can get fat from butter or from beef tallow. That's much more expensive than factory farming monoculture soybean and canola and then shredding it and then running it through a process.
Yeah. And that's our bodies, right? Our bodies, they're processors. They're not like they continue to regenerate new cells, they regenerate new
Yeah.
things. So anytime that there's something in the body that's staying there, and it's not doing anything, it's not moving, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes that's going to create an issue. And so that's where this trans fat becomes an issue. That's where obviously heavy metals become an issue. That's where pesticides become an issue. All of these things are meant to be moved throughout the body, but they're very difficult to move throughout the body. And so what happens is we start to get symptoms because we have pathways that are blocked or pathways that have issues in them, that need to be resolved, but they can't be resolved alone on food alone. Food alone can help with some of this stuff, but sometimes you need a little bit of extra support with your physiology or biochem to like get this stuff out in terms of detoxing, drainage, and everything else.
Yeah, a lot of that is just staying away from your processed vegetable oils is going to be the best way. Almost all these fats are going to be in packaged foods for the most part.
Mhm.
Now, we have a lot better packaged food options today. People are more aware. Like I can go get, Boulder organic potato chips that are avocado oil,
Yep.
organic potato, and sea salt, like 3 ingredients. It's like, oh my gosh. Or I can get my, siete chips that are going to be cassava, yucca based, a little bit of olive oil or coconut oil, sea salt, like simple ingredients. Like you can still
Yep.
have foods that are more processed and be healthy due to
Mhm.
kind of manufacturing demand, capitalism working, so to speak. People are
Yep.
responding and you're seeing more options. Same with like some of the mayo products, right? Used to be always soy and canola, and now you're getting avocado oil, which is going to be a better, higher quality monosaturated fat similar to olive oil. And so, when you look at your fats, you want at least half your fats to be more saturated. Saturated fats, they have single bonds between all the carbons, and
Mhm.
they're going to be less prone to oxidation and to breaking down. Oxidation is bad for fats. We want fats that are non-oxidized. So then when we take them in, we're not building up our cell membranes with junky fats. Then the other side of the fence, good omega-3 fats, primarily from animal-based sources like fish,
Mhm.
because the other fats, if you get alpha linolenic acid from, let's say, flax, you only convert 5 or 10% of that to your long chain DHA, EPA, omega 3s that help with brain and inflammation. And so you don't convert a lot of that. So vegans, vegetarians, make sure you're taking notes on that out of the gates. And so then, if you're doing plant based fats, you want fats that are not going to be processed. The problem with a lot of
Mhm.
plant based fats is they're damaged in the processing. Think soy, think canola, think safflower. I mean, go into YouTube right now. Just type in how is canola oil processed. There's a video that will walk you through the 36 steps of how it's processed. It's
Mhm.
nasty. It's gross. Do not watch it while you're eating. But if we could use fats that are cold pressed, like
Or do
olive
watch while you're
oil,
eating.
yeah, like if you do fats that are like plant based that are cold pressed, like an olive or avocado, that's going to be a much safer, better fat to do. And then you choose your healthy saturated, whether it's coconut, a palm, or a tallow, or grass fed, beef kind of compound, or like the fats you get in egg yolks. Those kind of things are going to be great.
Yeah, and I think you
Or
made a good
butter
point.
too. And again, either ghee, which is going to be lactose, casein free, or
Mhm.
butter if you can tolerate a little bit of the lactose and casein.
Yeah, and you make a good point. It wasn't long ago that if you went through the grocery store, you weren't going to find anything
No,
that didn't have, a ton of extra stabilizers in it, and extenders, right? And that's the key, and that's what you're seeing inside of a lot of the vegetarian type stuff as well. Though if it's processed, it's likely got a bunch of different stabilizers in it to make it,
correct.
stay together and to do the thing that it's supposed to do. I mean, you look at beef, it's like it's beef. Right. And now there's other chemical processes in that, and you could, make a list and say, hey, look, these have a bunch of things in it too that nobody knows. But we're talking about sort of more of a synthetic type of a stabilizer and or one that just oxidizes, which we don't want that inside of the body as well. Um, so yeah, I mean, starting off our conversation again, what was it? Chloroquat. Can't say it.
Chloroquat,
There you go. Chloroquat. Went from there to talk about pesticides. And from there,
glyphosate, organochlorines.
yep. Then we hit up heavy metals, hit up mycotoxins, mold, hit up BPA, plastics, and then again the trans fats. And so there's a lot of different things that can, create toxicity inside of the body. The body needs to be able to flush this stuff out. But what I think the takeaway from this is, paying attention to what you're putting inside of your body and knowing what it's doing, whenever you are doing it. And so I think, like you said earlier, it's not so much that you can't ever do these things, but just know that when you do, things are happening, right? Like that's what
Yep.
it comes down to.
You can ignore reality, but you cannot ignore the consequences of reality. Shoot for 80-20. The healthier you are, 80% of the time should get you enough adaptability in your physiology and health where you can be off a little bit. I tell patients though, when you start doing 20% of the time, do you like it? Do you like how you feel? Do you feel inflamed where you're like, I'd rather not do that? Then you
Yeah.
just choose for the healthy substitute. Oh, okay, I'm going to have some chips. I'm going to do the avocado oil-based chips that are going to have a good sea salt in there. I'm not going to do the trans fats. And if I have some alcohol, I'm going to choose a clean vodka that's charcoal filtered. Or, you can go down the list with fats or if you're doing other oils, we're going to choose good healthy fats. Or if we're doing, foods that are laden with pesticides, I'm at least going to do rice that's going to be organic and not have the potential pesticide residue or mold residue, right? So we try to just make better choices, and the healthier we are, the more adaptability we're going to have with our health.
Yeah. And I think if people want to get started, I mean, one of the things we talk a lot about is, test, don't guess. But if you want to try to get a good understanding of what's going on inside of your body, and in particular with heavy metals and all the things that we're talking about, what are a couple of labs that we would start at?
So, we could definitely look at organic acids and get a window into glutathione levels because, when we look at detoxification and the pathways that we need to function well, a lot of them are going to involve glutathione and they're going to involve sulfur amino acids. And if we can get a window that these pathways aren't working well, that tells us that our ability to handle toxins is going to be less. So when we look at our phase 2 nutrients, right, this is our cytochrome P450 oxidase pathway. It's mainly amino acids, right? Glutamine, glycine, cysteine. Again, these are the 3 amino acids that make glutathione, right? You see glutathione over here a little bit as well, or see cysteine over there. But these are the pathways, right? And again, you're going to see cruciferous vegetables, right? Sulfur. But these protein, guess what? If you have junky digestion, these phase 2 nutrients are going to be significantly impaired. This is how we eliminate, through our kidneys, our urine, through our bowels and gallbladder. We need these important nutrients. And so if we don't get it through our food, we're definitely not going to be optimal. So we can test organic acids to see what's happening in that area. We can also look at the gut function because so much of the gut is responsible for absorbing and breaking down these important nutrients over here. We can look at it and see, toxicity where you're at. We can do tests to see if we have plastics residue or pesticide residue or mold residue. So we can see if that's an issue. Or we can do a urinary challenge to look at heavy metals if we need. Again, a lot of times if we see someone has a history of these foods, it may be better just to get them to make diet and lifestyle changes first and then test later because we can get so much of that reduction with just healthy diet and lifestyle changes out of the gates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's been a great conversation. The takeaway to this is, make sure that you have good food choices. Of course, the water filtration, we talked a little bit about that.
Reverse osmosis is ideal, or a good whole house carbon-based filter, and then test it. Get a TDS meter as well and see where you're at before and after. See if you can get below 100 or below 50 on the TDS before you add minerals back in.
Yeah, do some of these things for the next 30 days. If you still have like a concern, both Justin and I do these labs. Both of us help people unwind their issues that they're dealing with. Or if you feel like you're just chronically inflamed, you're just too far over, you feel like you need help, we're here for that as well. So we can get started anywhere with any of this kind of a process in terms of your health, any chronic issues that you're dealing with, both brain, gut, organs, any kind of systems that you have an issue with. So yeah, this is great.
And you can access Rob's information, telemedicine virtual wise at heritagehealth.life. And then you can get myself, Dr. J, at justinhealth.com. There'll be links to access that for all of us here. If you guys need help, just start taking some of the information that we talked about in today's podcast, apply it. You're going to solve a lot of it by cutting out grains, by eating some kind of a good high quality organic paleo template, having some kind of a good carbon-based or RO-based water filter. Something is better than nothing. And then we can work on getting an air filter or something to get the air a little bit clean there next. And then from there, we can do some testing or add in some additional nutrients to upregulate these pathways. So everything we're talking about is upregulating physiology and getting you healthier. So hopefully there's some little bit that you can take there nugget-wise. Anything else, Rob?
Yeah, I think it's been great. It's a great conversation. It's something we'll be talking about again because, hey, it's going to be around. So we're just here to help you guys in your journey. We're here to help you, to get to where you want to be, to return back to yourself if you're kind of too far gone. But yeah, it's been great. Yeah, that's it.
All right, man. Good chatting with you. You guys enjoy your day. And then comments down below. We'll put links down below and give us a thumbs up and a like and a share. Take care, y'all. Bye now.
Blessings.